So now let's move on and talk about TSCA PBT prohibition updates. There's been some amendments, and these provide a significant amount of relief to electronics producers. So what is this PBT thing? Well, on January of 2021, the United States EPA passed some final rules banning or restricting 5 persistent bioaccumulative and toxic substances under the Toxic Substances Control Act. Now, this caught everybody by surprise because 4 out of 5 substances apply to substances present in articles, as well as in raw substances and compounds. To make it worse, the industry was only provided 60 days to comply with this. If we look at the 5 substances, really the 2 of concern are PIP-3.1 and decaBDE. Now, decaBDE, the risk is pretty low because it's largely been removed from the electronic supply chain already. PIP-3.1, on the other hand, is known to be present in some materials, but the industry wasn't tracking that substance, so they had no idea where it was in the supply chain, which materials, which components. They didn't have any of that information. So the industry pushed back, and EPA provided a 180-day delay in the enforcement for the PIP-3.1 substance only. That delay was extended again in September of 2021, and then again in March of 22 with the final enforcement date of October 31st, 2024. So as we got closer to that October 2024 date, where the PIP-3.1 restrictions were going to come into force and they were going to start enforcing that, EPA issued a new final rule. And that final rule provided an amendment, to the PIP-3.1 and decaBDE prohibitions. What that did was it provided relief to manufacturers in certain sectors. And when I say certain sectors, I mean largely electronic equipment manufacturers and electrical equipment manufacturers. So when it comes to decaBDE, an exemption has been provided for decaBDE that's present in a product or article below 0.1% by weight, if it's not intentionally added. So what that means is that if you have trace elements that are present that you didn't add in there intentionally, those are exempt. But really, it's the PIP-3.1 changes that have brought so much relief. So this first exclusion is huge. And what it does is it provides a permanent exclusion from this restriction or this prohibition for products that are used on circuit boards and wiring harnesses. So this would include things like resistors, capacitors, semiconductors, and that's where we've been finding a lot of this in. So those are now permanently excluded, meaning we don't have to worry about the components on our PCB. We don't have to worry about our cable assemblies. However, other parts of an electronic or electrical device would be in scope. For example, enclosures, pumps, motors, fasteners, servos, tubing, external connectors that are not mounted to the circuit board. Those would all remain in scope. However, we're going to see that a lot of products will be subject to extensions in that realm. So while the processing and distribution of the raw PIP-3.1 is still at October 31, 2024, meaning we can no longer process or distribute the PIP-3.1 or mixtures that have that in it for use in articles. In other words, we can't exchange or use PIP-3.1. However, if we have already built physical product, if we have our articles, our products that have been built, and they have PIP-3.1 in them, we can continue to distribute those until October 31st, 2026. So they've given us a 2-year window to clear out any stock of product that contains PIP-3.1. Now, let's look at the notable changes here from an extension perspective. So in the case of consumer electronics, those are now in scope as of 2026. We can no longer ship consumer electronics that contain PIP-3.1. But as we know, we can ship until then the products we've already built. If we need to ship replacement parts for those consumer electronics, we can do so until 2031. PIP-3.1 will be allowed in new manufacturing equipment, specifically included in the semiconductor industry. So semiconductor manufacturing equipment, but really any manufacturing equipment, any new heating, ventilation, air conditioning, refrigeration, or water heating equipment, power generation equipment, new laboratory equipment, and this is a big one, new commercial electronics until November 2034. Commercial electronics is non-consumer, so not household use. They can be contained in new motor vehicles and heavy motorized machinery and their parts until November of 2039. Now, when it comes to the new motor vehicles, The replacement parts can contain that until 2054. When we look at the commercial electronics, we have to have the PIP 3.1 out of our commercial electronics by 2034, but we can continue to ship the spare parts for those until November of 2049. If we look at lubricants and greases, which are commonly used in hard drives with PIP 3.1 in them, those can continue to be there until November of 2039. However, keep in mind that lubricants and greases used for aerospace and turbine engines have a permanent exclusion. And speaking of aerospace, new aerospace vehicles can have PIP 3.1 until 2054. So I encourage you to review this and see, hey, based on my type of product, where do I lie? Because you might be seeing exceptional relief in this requirement at the moment.
Watch the full-length video and gain access to our full archive of educational webinars at greensofttech.com/videos. And while you're there, learn about our premier solutions for environmental regulation compliance.